My name is Helen. I'm 58 years old, and for most of my life, I believed I was a good mother. I raised my daughter, April, as a single mom. Her father left when she was 2, and from then on, it was just the two of us. I worked full-time as a nurse, picked up night shifts to afford her dance classes, private tutoring, anything she wanted. We had movie nights, road trips, matching charm bracelets. People used to tell me we were more like best friends than mother and daughter. But I didn't know the truth. April died last fall. Car accident. She was 24. Destroyed me. I spent days in silence. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Her apartment lease was still active, and when I finally gathered the strength to go there, I just wanted to smell her shampoo, touch her things. I found the diary by accident. It was under her bed. A leather-bound notebook with a broken strap. My name was written on the first page. For Mom. Read only if I'm gone. Opened it. And what I found inside didn't just break my heart. It shattered everything I thought I knew. Because my daughter had been living a double life. The first entry was dated nearly 3 years before April's death. Just a few weeks after her 21st birthday. Mom thinks I'm still at school. But I dropped 2 classes. I couldn't handle the pressure. I didn't tell her. Can't. She already sacrifices so much. She'd be so disappointed. I stopped reading. My heart pounded. She dropped classes. When? Why didn't she tell me? The next page got worse. I lied again today. Told her I was going to study group, but really I met with Ben. He said he could help with money. I hate lying, but I need the cash. I can't keep asking Mom. I didn't know a Ben. The name never came up. As I read on, it became clear. April had been struggling. Financially. Emotionally. Secret jobs. Panic attacks. And something else that chilled me, she mentioned a place. Studio. The studio isn't what I expected. It's not just dance. But they pay in cash. And the guy said I have the look. I haven't told anyone. Not even Chloe. Chloe was her best friend. If April hadn't told Chloe, I knew she wouldn't have told me. What kind of studio pays cash and wants girls with the look? Felt sick. I kept reading, flipping through entries, watching her secrets spill onto the page. And then I saw a name I recognized. He said not to use his real name, but he goes by Marcelo at the studio. I've seen him around the hospital. Think he's a doctor. He scares me a little, but he's always nice to me. Marcelo. Doctor. From my hospital. I slammed the diary shut. Because now it wasn't just about what April had hidden from me. It was about who else knew. I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the name Marcelo in my mind. I replayed every moment in the hospital where a tall, charming doctor with a strange accent smiled too long at the nurses. I had to know what kind of studio April was talking about. The next morning, I called in sick and drove to the address listed on a flyer I found tucked into one of her notebooks. Starlight Movement Arts. It sounded harmless enough. But when I pulled up, I knew something was off. The windows were tinted black. The sign out front was chipped. The entry buzzer asked for a code. I stood there a long time before someone opened the door. A woman in her 20s with a cigarette and wary eyes. Looking for someone, she asked. I'm April's mother. Her face changed. Not shock, something more cautious. She let me in. Inside was a mirrored dance room. Hallway with closed doors. Music thumped faintly through the walls. She was good, the woman said quietly. Real graceful. Kind too. What did she do here? The woman hesitated. Depends who was paying. My stomach dropped. She didn't do anything illegal. Don't look at me like that, the woman added. But she got caught up. Marcelo had his favorites. He paid extra if you did the VIP shows. I didn't want to ask what that meant. Instead I asked, do you know where I can find him? She looked me up and down. You already know where he works. I nodded slowly. 'Cause I did. I walked into the hospital that evening on autopilot. Marcelo worked in neurology. Everyone loved him. Patients praised his charm. Nurses fought to be assigned to his rotation. He remembered birthdays, brought in cookies, but I saw something else now. I waited until his shift ended. I stood by the back entrance near the staff lot. He stepped out at 7:12 p.m., dressed in navy scrubs, tapping away on his phone. "Marcelo," I called. He looked up surprised. Then he smiled. "Helen, right? Pediatrics." He nodded. "I'm sorry for your loss," he added, his face suddenly serious. "So he knew." "You knew April," I said. He blinked. "We met. Once or twice." I pulled the diary from my bag, opened it, showed him his name. "She wrote about you. About the studio." His face didn't change. Not much. But something in his eyes went cold. "She misunderstood," he said calmly. "I helped her. She was in a bad place. I offered her work, a way to cope. At a dance club with VIP shows." He shrugged. "She was an adult. She made choices. I didn't force her." I was shaking. "You exploited her." He stepped closer, lowered his voice. "You're grieving. Get it. But you don't want to ruin your retirement over rumors, do you?" That was the moment I knew. He wasn't just guilty. He was dangerous. I couldn't let it go. Marcelo stood there, so calm, so collected, like none of it mattered. Like April was just a name on a list. But I remembered what the girl at the studio said. She wasn't the only one. So I went back. It was late, but the studio's lights were still on. A different girl opened the door this time. Younger, wearing heavy makeup, her eyes tired. I told her who I was. I didn't lie. She paused, then nodded. "Wait here." 10 minutes later I was in a back room. 4 women sat around a couch. All in their 20s. One of them was the girl from before. The one who remembered April. They didn't cry. They didn't gasp. They already knew. One of them, Kayla, handed me a folded paper. "She gave this to me. Said if anything ever happened to her, to give it to you." It was a letter. From April. "If you're reading this, Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hide. I just didn't want to disappoint you. But if something happens, it wasn't an accident. Please don't believe it was." I sat there frozen. "What do you mean, if something happens?" I whispered. Kayla looked down. There was another girl. 2 years ago. Same setup. Studio. Marcelo. She moved away after a fall. My heart started racing. April's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a pattern. I didn't sleep that night. I read April's letter over and over. I could hear her voice in every word. Scared, brave, determined. By sunrise, I knew what I had to do. I made 3 copies of the letter. I printed out excerpts from the diary. I wrote down everything the girls told me, dates, names, places. And then I went to the police. I asked to speak with a detective. A woman named Ruiz took me into a small, cold interview room. I handed her the folder. "My daughter died in a car crash last year," I said. "But she left me this. And I don't think it was an accident." She read. First politely, then more slowly. Her brow furrowed. "I remember the case," she said. "But it was closed. UI. Single vehicle. Rainy conditions." "She didn't drink," I said. "Not since high school." Ruiz looked me in the eyes. "You're telling me she was pushed?" "I'm saying she was scared. She left a warning. And there are others." She nodded slowly. "Give me some time." I walked out of the station with my legs shaking. An hour later she called me. "We pulled the black box from the vehicle," she said. "There's a brake override pattern that doesn't match the report." "What does that mean?" "It means someone might have tampered with her car." My throat went dry. "Mrs. Green, we're opening a case." Detective Ruiz moved quickly. Within a week, she subpoenaed records from the studio. Banking activity. Camera footage. The works. She also pulled all of Marcelo's medical credentials and filed complaints going back 10 years. He was slippery, smart, polished, connected. But something cracked. One of the girls, Kayla, agreed to speak on record. She brought a voice message Marcelo had left months earlier. "You're lucky I'm still protecting you. Remember who pays the rent. One mistake and I pull everything." That was enough. They brought him in. Ruiz didn't tell me right away, but I got a call from one of the nurses at the hospital. They took him from the locker room. In cuffs. Felt like justice for a second. Later that night Ruiz called me. "We questioned him for 3 hours," she said. "He's denying everything. Says April was emotionally unstable. That you're grieving and confused." I was ready for that. But then she said something else. "We searched his apartment. Found a burner phone. And in it text messages. Ones he deleted. One of them said, 'It's done. She won't talk again.'" I couldn't breathe. Was it about April? "We're trying to confirm. But the date. It matches the night she died." 2 days later I saw him again. Not in handcuffs. Not in court. The grocery store. He was wearing sunglasses, a baseball cap. Pretending to be invisible. Marcelo had been released on bail. His lawyer claimed insufficient evidence for detainment. I froze when I saw him. But he saw me too. He smirked. Just a flicker. But I saw it. I turned and walked out. Back in my car I called Ruiz. "How is he free?" "We're still building the case," she said. "We need more. His lawyer is aggressive. But the DA is watching closely." Felt like screaming. He was walking free while April was in the ground. That night I met with the other girls again. We sat around Kayla's kitchen table. No makeup. No defenses. "He's watching us," one whispered. "I saw him near my building." "He followed me last week," said another. Pulled out my phone. "We're not waiting anymore," I said. We started documenting everything. License plates, photos, locations, messages. Because if the justice system moved slow, we'd make sure it didn't forget. We launched the website at midnight. April's photo was the first thing people saw. Smiling, hopeful, beautiful. Beneath it, the words. She wasn't the only one. We titled the site Voices of Starlight. We shared our stories. Mine, Kayla's, 2 others anonymously. Excerpts from April's diary. Screenshots of messages. Locations. Faces blurred, names changed. But the truth was unmistakable. By sunrise we had 2,000 views. By noon 50,000. Then the reporters called. Local first. Then national. Detective Ruiz called me that evening. Her voice was tight. "We're getting pressure from upstairs. The mayor's office. Someone leaked the case file. You might have just changed everything." 2 days later, Marcelo was suspended from the hospital. A week after that, another girl came forward. Then another. And then a mother. She said, "I read your story. My daughter died 2 years ago. They called it an overdose. But now I'm not so sure. I cried for her. I cried for all of them. And then I got back to work. Because the truth wasn't just coming out. It was roaring." Ruiz called me again. "This is bigger than we thought," she said. "We're coordinating with state and federal prosecutors. You need to prepare." "Prepare for what?" "Yes. For trial. And for everything that comes with it." The next few weeks blurred together. Depositions. Interviews. Lawyer meetings. Therapy. All of it happened in a storm. I met with a victim's advocate. She helped me sort through April's belongings. I gave the DA copies of the diary, the letter, the burner phone screenshots. Each girl gave testimony. Some in person, some by video. We had to relive it. Over and over. But it brought us closer. We became a team. A sisterhood. The prosecution built a timeline. 12 years of manipulation. 6 confirmed victims. 2 suspicious deaths. Dozens of financial records, hidden accounts, fake names, shell companies. And at the center, Marcelo. His lawyer tried everything. Motion to dismiss. Claims of unreliable narrators. Emotional instability. Jealousy. But the paper trail didn't lie. And neither did April. She'd written it all down. And we were going to make sure it was read aloud. In court. The courtroom was packed. Every seat filled. Reporters in the back. Supporters on the left. Lawyers everywhere. I sat in the front row. Kayla beside me. My hands clenched tight in my lap. Marcelo walked in with his attorney. Hair slicked back. Suit perfect. He didn't glance at me. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Opening statements began. The prosecution told the story like a slow burn. Methodical, documented, devastating. The defense painted us as confused, emotional, unstable. But then they brought out April's diary. Page by page. The jury listened. Silent. Focused. Then came the audio recordings. The courtroom shifted. I could feel it. Kayla's hands trembled. One juror wiped a tear. Marcelo kept his face still. But his eyes flicked. And then the letter. The one April left for me. The prosecutor read it aloud. Mom, if you're reading this, I need you to know I love you. I need you to know none of this was your fault. But please, if something happens to me, don't stop looking. Silence. The judge called recess. Outside the courtroom, I stood by the railing and looked up at the sky. I whispered, "We're here, baby. I'm still looking." Day 2 of the trial opened with witness testimony. Kayla was first. She walked to the stand in a simple blouse and black slacks. No makeup. No lawyer coaching. Just truth. She told the jury everything. How she met Marcelo. How he offered to help with rent. How that help turned into control. Fear. Shame. She didn't cry. But 3 jurors did. Then came another girl. Then another. Their stories echoed each other. Different details, same pattern. I watched Marcelo squirm for the first time. Then the prosecution called me. I felt my knees weaken as I approached the stand. The oath felt heavy. I spoke slowly, clearly. I told them about April. About the night she died. About the diary. About the letter. About everything. At one point I saw Marcelo watching me. Cold. Silent. But he didn't scare me anymore. I looked back at the jury. My daughter wasn't broken. She was brave. She tried to save others. With her words. Her truth. I held up the diary. And now it's our turn to finish what she started. The courtroom was silent. The jury filed in. No one moved. No one breathed. I reached for Kayla's hand. The judge asked, "Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor." We stood. On the charge of coercion and exploitation, we find the defendant, Marcelo Reyes, guilty. On the charge of tampering with a motor vehicle, guilty. On the charge of manslaughter in the death of April Green, guilty. My knees nearly gave out. Kayla held me up. The judge thanked the jury and called for order. Reporters rushed outside. People wept. Ruiz hugged me tight. "She did it," she said. "You both did." Marcelo showed no emotion. Not as he was led out in cuffs. Not as the sentence was announced. 38 years, no parole. But I felt something. Relief. Not closure. Not quite. But something close. I drove home that night in silence. Lit a candle in April's room. Opened her diary one last time. She asked me to keep looking. I did. And I found the truth. A year passed. The world kept spinning, but mine moved differently. I started volunteering at a women's shelter. Speaking to survivors. Sharing April's story. Not from grief anymore, but from strength. Kayla opened a non-profit with one of the other girls. They called it April's Voice. They help women exit coercive situations. Give them shelter, education, legal aid. The site we built, Voices of Starlight, is still live. New stories come in every month. Some tragic, some triumphant. All honest. I moved to a smaller house. Planted a garden. Wrote in a journal of my own. And every week I visit April. Her grave is quiet. But I talk anyway. I tell her about the women she helped. The lives she saved. The truth she left behind. And I always end the same way. You were brave, April. You still are. 2 years later I stood at a podium again. This time it wasn't a courtroom. It was a college auditorium. The university April once attended invited me to speak at a memorial scholarship event. They named it after her. The April Green Courage Award. I looked out at a crowd of students. Bright, hopeful, nervous, just like she was. I told them April's story. Not the pain, the courage. Her words. Her fight. And when I finished they stood. Applauded. Some cried. Afterward a girl came up to me. She hugged me tight and whispered, "She saved me." I almost didn't speak up. But then I found your website. Held her. And I cried too. Later that night, I lit one last candle in April's room. Closed the diary. Wrapped it in ribbon. Placed it on a shelf next to her photo. And I whispered, "You can rest now. I'll carry the rest."